Does anybody have questions? Raise your hand. Y'all are killing me.
Okay, so I had a bit of a open-ended question. Was about yeah. So your opinions about getting observables as standardized part of web.
Yes, we're in favor of it.
So, but the chances of getting it, and when do you feel like, and what are the obstacles there? Like,
That sounds like.
It was already discussed, I guess, at Angular Connect and many other conferences. So there is this very old proposal, still untouched. And as Ben explained, what it would take is some new champion that take over this topic and try to explain it and convince the rest of the board. In general, observables would be not that big of a deal because they are way more primitive than promises. But yeah, please.
Oh yeah, you know about RxJS.
Yeah, I might. I used to be the co-champion of the proposal, so what happened there? There are a number of issues. The first one of them being is that the way promises work is the fact that all work must be asynchronous, and unfortunately. Alrighty then. Sorry about that. So RxJS has no such guarantee necessarily that that things are asynchronous the way it's designed right now. So what's the usual arguments that would come out where Zalgo this and Zalgo that, meaning that it's indeterminate whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. And that's one of the things that kind of held things up, is because we didn't necessarily want an opinion on those particular things. And we tried coming at it from a number of different angles in terms of adding additional methods to observers, and nothing has really stuck. And it's a shame kind of that it hasn't stuck in TC39, but part of me thinks that it probably belongs more to the DOM than it does to the JavaScript language. The reason why I believe that is because the DOM elements themselves, things such as events, are a perfect match for observables, whereas in base JavaScript doesn't really have a concept of these things. And the way promises were standardized, it was kind of a dual effort between the web community and TC39 to come up with this consensus. So it would kind of have to go that similar route, I think, in order for there to be some sort of consensus on what the observables proposal might be. And I think, I'd like to think that that some of the browsers and all of that will definitely take a look at that, because we're starting to see a lot more of these quote-unquote observer pattern objects, like the mutation observer and a few of these other kinds of observer objects that would probably be a lot better served if they were observable.
More questions?
I will run with a mic to you, but come closer because I'm quite unfit.
If you guys understood the amount of knowledge on this stage, like, we could answer so many questions. There we go.
Very unfit.
Okay, it's a general question for all the panel. We have seen a lot of talks in this conference and other conferences as well about doing things the right way with Angular, making this decision or the other decision. And since Angular is an opinionated framework, do you think that it is not opinionated enough, maybe?
Well, it's not as opinionated as Victor Savkin. No, I mean, the thing is, I love Victor. No, I say that that's very affectionate. Okay, so he actually was the first one that I heard talking about that, because Angular is very specific, right? And Angular itself is very opinionated because we've been through there's so much collaboration. And I know on the GDE Slack channel, I got really excited because you see, Deborah Carrata and John Papa. John. Come on, John. Everybody tell John, come up. Come on, John. Come on. That was kind of crazy. I said his name and he just appeared, right? Anyway, the thing is, so all of these people, I mean, all of these people in the community have been collaborating so much for so long, right? That if there's two different ways to do it, then probably they're going to get together and talk about it and argue until they come up with something. And there's been some huge, I mean, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? There's some very, very, very smart people who have been working on this for a long time. And I'm not going to argue with Victor Savkin. Are you kidding me? Have you met Victor Savkin? Like, he knows what he's talking about. Anybody else want to comment on that question? Of course, Mike Hardington. Okay, pass it to Mike.
Pass the mic to Mike.
Yeah, opinions. The fact that there are like these style guides and there are all these approach to do things the right way, but you could look at a dozen apps and all see different ways of doing things the right way. I think not being overly opinionated is probably good because it's not like there are rules, there are guidelines, and not every guideline is like a law. You don't have to follow everything to a T. You have some flexibility, but if you follow like the main concepts, you're still able to get performance, get a pretty performant app without having to, your modules must be set up like this, your routes must be set up like this. There's some flexibility in there.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that the goal isn't to be ultra opinionated. That's a means to an end, right? The goal is really to make your life easier as a developer. And different frameworks are different places along the spectrum of how they do that. And it just happens to be with the Angular community, we've always thought that when there is, over time, a consensus over the right way to do things, that we try to emphasize that a lot more. And so the Angular team will always tell you that there are a subset of things that they don't try not to have an opinion on because there is no clear answer per se, and there are a lot of good answers. And so it's not that you would just want to have an opinion on that just for the sake of having an opinion, but over time that may change. Over time, because of a variety of different factors, the community may start to converge on something, and then it will become an opinion. So I think that's something that happens a lot.
So the Angular team themselves have said a lot. We don't write apps, like we build a framework. So they don't know a lot of the questions that we have. And Angular itself is pretty young. Like even the most experienced Angular developer up here has only been doing Angular for a few years. And so we're still trying to figure it out. And a lot of the community organizers, like the people who built this conference, year over year, you see the different types of talks being submitted because the community is swerving back and forth as they get deeper and deeper with Angular. So a lot of these best practices, I mean, none of them are coming from the Angular team. These are all best practices from the community. So I think it's good to keep that distinction. And if anything ever got big enough, it does start to kind of come into the fold. So yeah.
I joined in the middle, so maybe I would say something someone already said, but I think a lot of that responsibility of is on us, on you guys, on all of us, because I think also when we learn, what's good for Angular or what's the best practices, I would look into other frameworks as well. There's no reason why we can't learn from what are the best practices of other frameworks and follow leaders on those frameworks. Because there's a lot of best practice, all those frameworks are moving fast, and I think as an individual, it's very beneficial to follow people from other communities. It gives you much broader perspectives, and that's on you, not on the Angular team.
one more thing I want to say, and then I want John to say something about this, because John was my hero a long time ago when it comes to writing beautiful code. But I think as far as being opinionated is concerned, the one big difference I see between the people who really know Angular and the people who are still learning, the people who are still learning write way more code, because some of the stuff, so much of this functionality is available. And if you really like harness the power of Angular and you get really good at it, you write the most beautiful, elegant code. I've worked with some people who are really good at this, and I've gotten good at this, and the code just gets more and more, it's beautiful code. And speaking of beautiful code.
Wow. I feel like something I did a couple of years ago was called the Angular Style Guide. And when I wrote that, thanks.
We really appreciate that.
It was fun. I wrote it for me, to be honest, and it got out there, which was fun. I put it on GitHub, but I was very careful to name it a guide. So somebody said it's guidelines, not rules, right? There's a good line from Pirates of the Caribbean. They're like, yeah, they're kind of like guidelines, not rules. And there was a reason for that, because I got sick and tired of, over my 20-something years of coding, of people telling me how I should code or how I should behave. And if you don't do it that way, they like shame you into doing things. Who wants that in their life? Let's be honest. So guidelines are important because you want to know, like, where's the path that will lead me to a good place? But if you go off the path, nobody should be shaming you or nobody should be telling you that's the wrong thing to do, whether it's Angular or anything else. And to me, it was really about getting readable code, making sure you could actually read it. Somebody else looks at your code, somebody else can understand it. And again, it's not about Angular. It's about what you're building and the code you're doing. To me, that's the most beautiful thing, is when somebody else can look at your code and understand what's happening. Unless you want job security and you don't ever want to leave and you want to be the only one who understands what you're doing. So that's kind of my thought on it.
More questions?
Anyone else got questions?
Oh, easy.
Hi, my question is for Samantha, but I want to congratulate you for your talk. I was really impressed.
Thank you.
I want to ask, now that you found new techniques for learning, how have you been finding learning Angular?
It's not easy to make in pictures, first off. Well, I want to say that the community has been incredible in this journey. Stephen Fluin has helped everybody. Anybody I talk to about this is happy to help. So that has really been my saving grace through this course. The community is just, you ask somebody to help you have a hangout with me and explain a concept visually to me. A lot of people have fun, actually. They're surprised at the end of the meeting. They're like, when can we do it again? That was awesome. And I have a lot of fun doing it. So it's not easy, but it is the most rewarding thing I have ever done with my life. So I can say that. Angular is amazing once I understood it. So yeah, does that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, hi. So I used to do a lot of Angular code, and recently I've been working more with the Polymer team and with the web standards and all this. And my question is, maybe looking 5 years into the future, as the vanilla web platform evolves and gets more and more features, like you can use event target, sort of obsoletes the need for services because you can extend that, and with web components and all these things. How do you see Angular diverging from the platform or converging to the platform and becoming one at some point?
Saunders, our future guy.
Thank you. I think in the future of Angular will be converging with default web components, and it will be an awesome toolkit that will be doing compile time framework things like Svelte is. Basically, it compiles to our runtime, and the runtime will be fully standard JavaScript, which you can lazy load every freaking part of it. Yeah. So I think that's like 3 to 4 years out. Yeah. Yeah, I have to ook my calendar for that. But yeah.
So is that Angular
You get it
16? Is that about right?
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. All right.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
My opinion on this would be that you have to look at why AngularJS was created in the first place and what was the motivations for creating AngularJS. And a big part was that it was hard to test UI applications inside of Google. And so I think that even if more of the browser does more of like the high-level features of Angular, Angular will still exist to make testing our UI applications easier for that platform.
Also, like, the standards bodies have been focused on making things like super low level and building on top of that. So like maybe web components become the de facto thing that everyone does. There's nothing saying that, oh, Angular's at component decorator just is behind the scenes generating that web component definition, and we're not dealing with any complicated structures. We're just making a request and loading that, but there's still Angular in there for not only the testing, but the syntactic sugar and structuring a large app a lot easier. It's like the difference between building a large app and building components. And having Angular or any framework in there to structure the application part, it's always going to be either something that you need or that's wanted.
I think in Angular there are two very important things. They are way more important than the code. It's the community and it's the tooling. And I guess even in 20 years, you need some kind of community and some kind of tooling.
And then also, we're never going to stop innovating, right? So like you're thinking of things in terms of, yes, from what is today, not yet a standard, but likely will be, that may fall away from what Angular kind of handles and fall into kind of the browser realm. But then there's going to be other stuff. And so there's always going to be space for building on top of the web standards. And I think that's where Angular will always have its kind of core philosophy that will provide value.
Maybe to expand a bit of what you said, like we're talking about standardizing on a browser. And I think Angular, you don't have to use it, or it's a rendering or UI framework for rendering maybe to other platforms as well. And I think even if the web platform will start standardizing, expanding, and being more performant, I think there's still a lot of need for different platforms to render on. And then maybe also, rendering on web views is not the best thing, but Angular can build an abstraction, and is already, I think, a very nice abstraction for rendering components over maybe other platforms like native or VR or who knows what else.
Questions?
Hi, I have primarily a question to Dibor, but maybe a community can also answer it. I liked your presentation a lot, and I appreciate your approach. I have a strong feeling that this is the right direction. But I'm enterprise architect and developer, and you mentioned that debugging of such applications will be challenging, let's say. And can you suggest any strategy, or do you have any ideas how to combine your approach with productive enterprise development? Thank you.
I think that this is something that you might want to answer. Do you know if, the last I talked to Ben Lesh, he was saying that there was some work being done in debugging.
There is. I can't speak to it.
Okay. He knows, but he can't tell us. But it will be easier to work with our observables. Do you know and you can tell us? Okay, he knows and he can tell us. I did talk to Ben, and Ben had said something was coming, but...
You guys don't tell anyone, okay?
Well, it's a little bit. So you might have read articles from Nicholas Jameson. He's on the core team. He has already a library called RxJS Spy. And right now he's actually building the DevTools extension for easier debugging ArcGIS. So he's been working on it for the last like half a year at least, and it's coming well. So hopefully soon. Yeah, no. Calendar? Can you open the calendar?
Did we release Angular 8 yet?
Sander? Slacker? Get her done! Where will we...
Last time I checked, it wasn't with.
Can you check again? Alex, where can we find it when it comes out? How will we know when it's released?
Twitter, exactly. Twitter will definitely know. But he's developing it on the open source. So he's under Cartan, I think. So
under what? How do you spell it?
C-A-R-T-A-N, I think. Yeah. Cartan. No, Cartan. Yeah, it's like a blue face. Yeah, so he'll let know. And the community would definitely pick it up.
I can't find it.
C-A-R-T-A-N-T.
A-N-T?
Oh, did he? Oh, he's changed it.
Will you retweet it for us, Alex? All right, good. Questions? More questions? You got this, Craig.
It's very tiring.
Da, 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 da.
Hi. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous.
So are we. It's okay.
I heard all your talks and they were really, really amazing. I'm still a beginner with Angular and I'm still learning the material and the component parts. And they're really, really, really nice so far. I've learned a lot, even from you. And my question is pretty specific. I haven't found this on Google yet, so it hasn't helped me. Maybe you can answer. Is there a way of building a component, like a custom component that would work with all Angular versions, like AngularJS and Angular?
Sam? The answer is yes.
Well, Angular Elements is a project that is mostly done, and that's how you can create a custom web component that basically just becomes a plain HTML and JavaScript object that you can embed basically anywhere. You could do that. No, I mean, Elements is ready enough, but when Ivy's here, it'll be like done. But that's how you can use Angular in any framework, basically, is through Angular Elements. But I'm not the only person who has opinions on this, so. Great question, though, and you're doing great. And welcome to the Angular community. We're glad you're here.
More questions? We're dropping knowledge here, y'all.
I've been reading a little about Angular compared to, for instance, React when we are talking about rendering and performant rendering. And it seems there are a difference that Angular has chosen a different path, something about service workers, or while React are doing a virtual DOM approach. Is that true? And what are the differences? And can you tell a little more about that?
Manfred? What about Max?
Jeff might do his Xplat. Jeff probably knows.
So the Angular rendering system has been kind of like rebuilt under the scenes. I don't know how many times since version 2. Yeah, okay, 4 different times. And they just get, like Tobias is a mastermind at figuring out ways to optimize and make it faster and that type of thing. And you're right that it is a different approach than in the React world on a number of ways, but that doesn't mean that it's better or worse. It's just a different path. I mean, they're both trying to achieve the same goals. And the next version, Ivy, is one of those major iterations underneath the scenes. So from your standpoint as a developer and user, it shouldn't matter too much other than just gaining the benefits, and that's sort of their goal, is that they want to be able to continue to make benefits underneath, changes underneath the scenes without actually changing the API As far as like timings and stuff like that, they spend a lot of time both for the server, so I focus a lot on the server rendering side, but both for client-side rendering and server rendering, they maintain all the performance metrics that they see every single release, like how it changes it, and to make sure that it never gets slower. So it is always improving. And I don't know, I haven't looked at if anyone else has the specific comparisons, but typically when you're doing performance comparison, it's tricky because getting apples to apples and really saying, this thing is faster than another thing, when really it's usually more of a circumstantial, like what specific app you're trying to build and under what conditions it gets tricky. They're both fast at the end of the day, and they're both getting better over time. So I've never seen an app where it actually mattered really that much. They're both fast enough, and I will say on the server rendering side, right this second before Ivy and before some of the changes that we have coming, React is definitely ahead in terms of performance with some of the more recent changes they made. But that will go away. I mean, just in the long game version of things, it's always going to be at par, even if they kind of go back and forth a little bit. So that's my opinion.
There has been a talk at the conference in Belgium, NGBE, done by Pascal Brecht and DJ Korthose, what's his name? Whatever, Oliver Zeigerman, yes, from Germany. And they compared the render time and measured some stuff. And the render time was very close to each other. So they did some very edge cases like rendering 50,000 components and then fixed it and improved the rendering and change detection, and then it was very close to each other. So as you mentioned, it doesn't matter that much.
You're going to hit JavaScript pass and network time way faster than you're going to hit any rendering issues these days.
I'm a guy who doesn't know all those things, but I think from the but for me as a developer, we shouldn't look at it as a competition between two frameworks or two toolboxes or whatever. It's in the end, indeed, it's just JavaScript, and React has certain benefits to it, but it also has some certain downsides. Angular has some benefits, but also has some downsides in the process. So I would always look at what is your problem or what are you trying to create, and go with the best choice. And if you made the wrong decision and you're lucky enough to maybe change during the process, do it. But for me, always it's like Vue, React, Angular, it's comparing apples with oranges because they're not exactly the same. Okay, they're rendered to JavaScript, but they have different kinds of approaches, and it's not a competition. It's actually more or less like a collaboration because we can learn from each other, and it's actually helping the whole JavaScript community to get better at it. So, yeah.
I can add a little bit. So, whenever you actually write code, there is two types of performance. There's one type of performance of you run an application, how fast it loads, how fast it reacts to your clicks, etc., etc. But there is a second type of performance is of you as a developer. If I give you a solution to build, how quickly can you deliver that solution to me? So, like technically, we could all argue like I could write an application assembly that will beat all of your applications, right? But by the time I finish, your business you're out of business and you're bankrupt, right? Actually, I can write assembly. It's a different story. So this is the thing, like another way, like where you look at their framework is like, how successful can they make you? How fast can you deliver? How well can you share your code with other people, right? Like, I actually personally love Angular because if I work on a project and somebody joins me in, like I don't have to explain like, oh, here's where the services are, here's my project structure. People just know what's going on. So I think like we should always assess frameworks like for those two ways, like how performant it is as a code and how performant is it as a tool for me to do my job and earn my bread and daily living.
I want to add just one thing to that. Angular is the only framework I know that with every release, my app gets smaller and faster without me having to do anything. And not only the CLI, the framework itself gets smaller. The whole thing gets faster also, especially when once Ivy hits the street, we will drop probably It will fix everything, yeah. Ivy will fix everything. Aside from that, it will drop probably like 20% of the load without any of you having to do anything real for that. It's just a bonus you get from using Angular. And that's the true power. You don't have to do that much and your applications get faster and smaller. What else do we want?
Yeah, this is a more specific performance question that I got when I started learning about NGRX, but I think this is a bit broader than that. If you have, let's say, a state with a number of properties, and in your template, I see most of the examples I see online have every place you need to bind to a property, you have the async pipe. And I thought, why? Why not just have one? And I saw, Deborah, in your talk yesterday, you used the VM just once in the page. So my question is there a performance issue with using it once or many times, or is it just a matter of taste? Especially for using NGRX.
So to make sure I understand your question, you're asking, is there a performance issue with using the async pipe multiple times?
Well, performance or other reasons for using it every place in your template.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer it, give an NGRX specific answer, and then let someone else give a non-NGRX answer. For NGRX, the reason we are encouraging you to use the async pipe is we want to help you write your state and deliver it to your components in an immutable way. We want you to make immutable changes to your state. And the benefits of that are that it makes the Angular framework have to do less work when it runs change detection. If you've done state immutably, then the Angular change detection doesn't have to actually inspect objects deeply to see if anything's changed. And so it can make a lot faster determination about what needs to be re-rendered. So any performance overhead on like using async pipe or observables or immutable data structures, you win back by making the Angular framework do less work.
So just to be specific, the question is if you have the state async pipe and then dot property. Does that make a difference?
No, that shouldn't make any difference in terms of performance. You disagree on that?
Okay, here's the rebuttal.
So comparing like one async pipe in a template to like 5 for accessing different properties,
or 20,
what happens in the async pipe is it injects the change detector ref and calls detect changes. So you might get like 5 times triggering change detection instead of just once with the one async pipe. So there is a difference. And it means that Angular would have to run through all of the active components 5 times instead of 1.
To kind of disagree with that. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the async pipe actually does mark for check, which means that it's just going to hook in that component to say, like, the next time you run change detection, like, also definitely check this component. So it's not because you use the async pipe that whenever the observable gets a new value that it's automatically going to trigger change detection. It's going to mark the component for, like, next time you run change detection, definitely check me, even though some of my parents has the on-push strategy, so I might be skipped. So that's kind of the difference, I think.
All right, so from hearing all these discussions, I want to raise this to a higher level. Measure before you optimize. So if it's not a problem, let's not worry about these small details. It's like, how's your developer experience? Do you want to have 10,000 async pipes in your template, or just one and then just call the properties on the object? All right.
So I guess my question was also, will I benefit from the, I would say, if you only update part of the state, would that only update that single place in your template where you access that property, even you have other places where you access other properties?
Yes. Angular is optimized for that, and it will do exactly that. Okay. Yes, it will. Angular is optimized for that, and it will just update the properties that have changed.
I really like the question because it shows, and we've all been there. It's like you see some code, you see the example, and then you see like a talk or whatever, or some blog online, and you see something else, and that's a good thing. We are all developers. We want to do the best thing. It's like Fabrice said, measure indeed, and it's something we all struggle with. We also always want to produce the best code that we can, but indeed questions like these also trigger us, that or people that want to do a doc, create a blog, like providing these examples to you, like you can do it this way, you can do it this way, this might be more optimal, or you can give an in-depth look of what is actually happening behind the scenes. But indeed, the questions that you ask, I think it's very valuable for us as well as the community to see what everybody is struggling with, because now you get different kind of answers, and you hopefully can check what is the best solution for you. But indeed, if it's not an issue yet, don't worry about it. But I think it's very valuable for you that you asked the question, and now you know the different kind of approaches and solutions. So thank you for that question.
So, can I answer? No?
Yeah, I mean,
all right.
we got time.
So I think that I think the answer to that depends on the scenario, and I approach it kind of from a defensive coding perspective. Not everyone who comes into your component is going to understand what's going on in your service, and so sometimes when you go from one subscription to two, you're now firing 2 HTTP requests, which can be like really not good. If you have already like 10 people subscribing to this one observable, then you probably aren't going to go any worse by adding an 11th, true? So I kind of, to defensively code, I do kind of try and follow the model that Deborah's showed everyone, just because sometimes when you go from one subscription to two on any given observable, and every observable is different, that's why you kind of have to know how to answer this per scenario. When you go from your first subscription to your second, you may now be firing, n number of HTTP requests. Or if you're using NGRX, you may be dispatching actions on the subscription. Like there's depending on how you're writing this stuff, limiting it to one async pipe per observable can be really important to do. So.
Okay, I've known these guys a while, and I just want to tell you that after this panel is over, I know you can sit with us now, but when we're done here, you can drink with us. And these theoretical conversations get more entertaining when you give them beer. So I just want to start to wrap this up, because after this, we're going to drink, and you guys can go drink with us. Does anybody have more questions? To the last. Okay, but then we got to go drink, Mike. Okay, the next
Yeah. First of all, I'd like actually to thank you all, because every single talk I watched, the whole conference was really amazing, and I think you all are really awesome.
We think you're awesome too.
Thank you. So my question is actually maybe a little bit different, since I'm a huge fan of WebAssembly. I actually would like to know, I don't want to compare frameworks again, but I know that React is actually doing a lot with WebAssembly together, like in the sense of that garbage collection in WebAssembly is not supported yet, but React is really like helping and supporting to bring WebAssembly integrating more into React apps. And I just would like to know, I heard at NGConf this question got asked, and there the answer was, no, we're not like having this on our roadmap and channeling. And I would just like to know why? Because you maybe might think that WebAssembly is not that good or well enough, or like well defined enough or whatever. I just would like to know what the current status is of that. Thank you.
Okay, so for the NGConf question, the reason the answer was no, you've heard a lot of us talk about Ivy. The Angular team is super focused on Ivy. I don't think that answer is going to change about WebAssembly or other roadmap things until Ivy ships. So I'm not going to say it's never going to happen for Angular, but the Angular team, and I think a lot of the community up here, we're all just really excited about Ivy, and that's kind of what we're focused on right now.
Yeah, so I've asked
Angular
this
16.
question to the team, and a little bit of what they said is WebAssembly doesn't optimize reading and writing to the DOM. And so anytime that you're manipulating the DOM, there's nothing that WebAssembly can do to speed that up or make it faster. WebAssembly makes mathematics much faster. And so there's not an incredible amount of benefit Angular itself is going to get inside of WebAssembly that it can't get without WebAssembly. So when you look at something like React or Angular, there's not a lot WebAssembly is going to bring to the performance here.
I think Aaron said most of it. There is also this boundary between WebAssembly and the DOM, which actually makes it a little bit slower than using JS directly. It's the same thing if you are communicating with a web worker or a service worker. You have to transpose your data from the web worker to the other side of the equations, and that takes time. And that's getting better, but it is not to a point that that hinders the performance so much it negates the net effect.
Thanks. So I want to look at this question from a different angle. I work for a company, Microsoft, who is investing heavily in WebAssembly in a lot of areas. And this is my personal opinion, not the company's, very clear. But what problem is it solving that you need it to use? That's the question we should be asking. For any new technology, I get asked this one question more often than anything else that I get asked when I go to conferences. How do you keep up with technology, and how do you know what to listen to and what not to pay attention to? The hardest part is that. If you think about everything we do, the flurry of things you hear about from all of us, and the talks, and Twitter, and blogs, and from the marketing engines of big companies like the one I work for, or Google, or others, we have to think about what we can listen to and what we don't need to. There's always a new technology. There's always something that's going to make something better, faster, stronger. But at some point, we all have to remember the days of 20 years ago when we couldn't write the same JavaScript in more than one browser and it wouldn't work. jQuery came along and solved that. And then the browsers got together and they all kind of had the same DOMs. 10 years ago, some of you may remember, the browsers themselves were all fighting over performance. We kept on seeing at every new major announcement from Firefox and Chrome and IE, when there was IE still coming out at Microsoft. They were always showing, oh, look how fast our performance is. I can throw 5 million fish on the screen and they swim fast. There's a point of diminishing returns for all these conversations. So my opinion with WebAssembly is that there are things it can solve. But I'm actually in the wait and see mode, personally. React, Vue, and Angular do everything I need. There is not an app I can't build today for the web or mobile that they don't solve as is. I have not yet seen sufficient information to show that WebAssembly will make my life so much better that I have to add it. So I'm personally happy they're focused on Ivy because I'd rather have that because I get benefit from it now with every app that I have than something that's one more thing I have to learn. And it's not to say the question isn't valid, it's very valid, but I personally feel like I'm going to let something else evolve and see where it goes first. Yeah.
We can answer non-technical questions too about career.
What time do we have to
Over there was a question over there, Kirk. You're a savory beignet.
So this is a little bit about NGRX as well, because I started using NGRX, and once I got my head around it, I really loved it. And then I hear a lot of talk of people saying you might not need NGRX. Yeah, I know.
Literally.
You might not need NGRX, and then I see different solutions where you don't use NGRX, and I'm thinking that's more complicated. And I'm just wondering if NGRX in the future might be more simple, because it looks like version 8 already will be more simple. Is that kind of the path you're moving on?
So I'll give you two answers to that question. The first is I hear it all the time from developers who love NGRX that they can't go back. Once you've changed to a reactive strategy for building applications, it can be really difficult to look at less reactive solutions and think, oh, that looks simpler, because you know sort of you've really grasped or really loved the reactive strategy. So you're not alone in loving NGRX. I'm really glad to hear that there's one person that does.
Well, you got Alex too, so that's...
There's three of us. And then as for the second answer, yes, we want to make NGRX simpler and more ergonomic for developers to use. NGRX 8 has a lot of new functionality, from everything from create action to create reducer to create effect that Alex showed in his talk, that are all about letting you write NGRX apps with less code. And there's also a new project from actually John Papa and Ward Bell called NGRX Data that's supposed to help developers get into NGRX even faster. It's new in NGRX 8. So they announced it a while ago. It kind of lived out and was being incubated and worked on and used in real apps to learn from it. We actually have brought it into the NGRX family, and it's going to be released as part of NGRX 8.
I have a controversial thing to add to that, because I learned NGRX a while back, and it took me a while. So when I finally got it working, it was like 3 a.m. and there was much celebration because I was like, oh my God, my NGRX code works, yay! And I was very proud of myself. And then I learned GraphQL. And you guys know GraphQL? Who knows GraphQL? We got work to do. Okay, so I actually got really frustrated with my friend Uri because I had just done all this really hard work, and I got NGRX working, and I loved it, and I was super excited about it. And then I was trying to use GraphQL, and I was like, wait a minute, there's an Apollo store and an NGRX store, but I don't really want to have two single sources of truth because that's kind of ridiculous, right? So I went back to Uri, and I was like, how do I sync up your store with my store? And he was like, you don't actually, well, he said, let me see what you're doing with NGRX. So I showed him, it was like load data success, load data error. And he says to me, you don't need that. It's like, Uri, I worked really hard on that, and it works, and I'm really proud of it. You can't take it away from me. And he's like, yeah, you can keep it if you want, but actually Apollo handles all of that for you. And I was really frustrated because I worked really hard to learn NGRX, right? But what I found out was that when I did actually end up moving it all, and the reducers that I had written for NGRX, like it's basically, it looks exactly the same because the way that he's doing it is the same way that Mike did it. So it's very similar. So I love NGRX, and I was very excited to learn NGRX, and I still use NGRX. But also, if you haven't heard, can you just, don't tell him too much because we want to go drinking in a minute, but can you just give him the quick version? Sorry, Mike.
So I really try not to do those things where when you talk about NGRX, you talk about another solution. Yeah. So I think the main thing when you choose like NGRX, Redux, GraphQL-based solutions, any state management solutions out there, what I would suggest for you to do is research why those concepts came to be, who created those concepts, and for what. Because if you look at if you research why Redux got created and the people that use Redux today, what are they using today, what kind of solutions they put on top of Redux and things like that, I think it will help you look forward to maybe find more solutions to use with NGRX to make your life a bit easier, writing a bit less code and maybe automate some things that today you write code for.
Another good resource on this topic of learning state management was actually Kim's talk at NGConf this year. It's called Subjecting State to Good Behavior, and it was about understanding why you might need state management, why not, and then how to use several different versions of RxJS, like behavior subject and things like that, to kind of work your way incrementally up to a full-blown state management system like NGRX. So I just wanted to embarrass Kim for a second, and because it was an amazing talk.
So one thing that I've seen happen with people who learn NGRX is you get this sort of curse of knowledge thing where all of a sudden, once you know and grasp the concepts of Redux, you want to use it on everything. And this happened to me, like once I learned it, I was like, I'm going to use this on every single app I ever build. And it just wasn't necessary a lot of the time. And what ended up happening, I think, anecdotally, was I hadn't used it for a little while, and then a new version came out, and I didn't know the new version. And then I was faced with a situation where I needed state management really, really quickly. I needed to do it very fast in a really small application. I didn't know the new version of NGRX, so I thought, well, what else could possibly work? And so I started I was able to spin up something really quickly that would work pretty efficiently in a small, rather uncomplicated application with behavior subjects. And that actually worked really well. So it got me thinking about the different situations where you need NGRX and where you don't. And it helped me to sort of step out of the curse of knowledge idea. So I definitely think it's hugely beneficial for a lot of people to use NGRX and things like GraphQL and things like that. But there's also situations where you don't need it, and it can, add levels of complexity to your application that maybe people who aren't already familiar with are going to have trouble with. So.
Yeah, it won't be a panel discussion without the NGRX to use or not to use. That's a hot topic recently, actually lately, actually. So one thing that I said during my talk, and Mike said, and Sam during their talk as well, is that NGRX is also not all or nothing. And Kim just said it as well. So I'm trying to really highlight this. You can still use NGRX for some pieces. If those pieces, just small pieces, it's okay to avoid it altogether, right? Like sometimes it's not worth it to bring for one particular problem. But if you use NGRX, right, you don't have to NGRX everything. I maintain this library within Google, and I also help on our internal users group. Yeah, and the Googlers who are asking hey, I have this problem. How can I use NGRX for this, right? And sometimes, and actually frequently, my answer is okay, let's look at your problem. Maybe it's not worth it. Somebody was asking the other day how I do a form async validation with NGRX. How do I wire it up? Why would you need this, right? Have a service, do the request, get the response back, have your error, whatever, validation, and you don't need it. So questions like that, right? So again, NGRX is not all or nothing. You can use it in some places and not use it in others. So ask yourself why.
And this is a hot topic, guys. We might never get out of here. I'm going to pass this. Can I pass this to? I wanted to say something real quick, but also I want to wrap this up because I think we've gone way over our time. My personal rule is I keep it as simple as possible. Don't add more stuff to your app without a good reason. And I'm going to pass it, but let's wrap this up so we can go drink.
You can ask more questions afterwards with alcohol.
So my former comment was very vague. So I just wanted to say, the Redux and NGRX introduced global immutable state that is reactive. This is a good thing. Now, with Redux, they didn't use TypeScript so much back then. So we didn't know what is the actual structure of our data. So we couldn't do a lot with it. We had to write a lot of manual code to take the data that we have, this reactive immutable data, and transform it into another structure of data. In Angular, we use TypeScript. We create the structure of the data anyway. The thing is, if we already write it in TypeScript and we know the shape, TypeScript helps us just validating in build time. But we can take the same data, put it at runtime, use it at runtime, and then automatically create the transformations that we do today manually. That's all.
Their brains are melting, Uri. We've been here all day. Aaron, did you want to say something? Okay. I really have one. I know. Okay, one last thing that I say, and I really think that I speak for everybody in the room. This is my first NG Vikings, and I am overwhelmed at the amount of love coming from these people right here, and I really love them, and I think we all do, and I want a round of applause for our organizers.